Hi, I'm Tessa with Brainrot News, with a few bits of news for you to choke on from April 10th, 2025. Welcome back to your daily reminder that America is not a country, it's a group project where half of the team stopped showing up and the other half thinks climate change is a Chinese hoax. Yesterday, the government asked if starving children were really our problem. Trump played the stock market like it owed him money, Congress declared financial war on your bank account, and Apple said LOL no to making iPhones in the land of the free. Meanwhile, national parks are being smogged back to the Industrial Revolution, immigrants now get a free deportation consultation with every Rikers Island stay, and if you don't speak English, good luck surviving the next tornado. Let's get into it.
Brainrot the news.
Good news, the United States has decided to sort of remember that people around the world need food to live after slashing emergency food aid like a drunken hedge fund manager with a grudge against rice. The government is now generously restoring assistance to places like Somalia, Syria, and Lebanon. That is unless you live in Afghanistan or Yemen, which, in case, sorry, your suffering doesn't quite fit the algorithm. You see, thanks to the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk's Frankenstein bureaucratic monster birthed from libertarian fever dreams and zero empathy, the US initially yanked food aid to basically everyone, to trim the fat, because fiscal responsibility is when you let children starve in conflict zones. But after a PR backlash from pesky do-gooders and human rights groups, the government quietly reversed course. Not all the way though, just enough to look like they care without actually doing the hard part. In Afghanistan, where more than 23 million people are teetering on the edge of famine, and Yemen, where over 2 million more face a similar fate, many people remain on the no food for you list, because apparently feeding desperate people who live in countries we've either occupied or drone bombed is just too awkward now. Better to focus on places where the headlines won't trigger a bad flashback to nation building or wedding airstrikes. So what's the official excuse? Vague concerns about corruption, accountability, and logistics. It's funny how those concerns evaporated when it came time to ship weapons, not wheat. When it's war, we find a way. When it's food, sorry, we need receipts. Meanwhile, the World Food Program is waving its arms like a drowning swimmer, warning that these cuts could lead to famine, political instability, and a new generation of people who grew up associating America with the words empty stomach. But hey, at least we've got a balanced spreadsheet back home. This isn't foreign policy, it's calculated apathy. It's a wealthy empire shrugging at humanitarian collapse because empathy doesn't poll well and starving children don't make campaign donations. In an absolutely shocking twist that everyone could have possibly foreseen, President Donald Trump may have actually played the stock market like a slot machine he rigged himself. On April 9th at precisely 9:37 a.m., Trump logged into Truth Social, a platform for conspiracy theories and boomer memes, and dropped this financial prophecy in all caps. This is a great time to buy DJT. And what happens a few hours later? Boom, he pauses all tariffs for 90 days. Markets explode like a champagne cork at the Goldman Sachs yacht party. The S&P rockets up 9.5%, clawing back $4 trillion in lost value faster than you can say insider information. And yes, before you ask, DJT also happens to be the stock ticker for Trump Media and Technology Group, the very company that Trump himself owns a juicy 53% stake in. The same company whose shares soared nearly 23% that same day, padding his pockets with an extra $415 million. Just a totally normal day in the greatest democracy money can buy. Legal experts are murmuring phrases like market manipulation and insider trading, while nervously glancing at the Constitution and wondering if it still does anything. But let's be real, this is 2025. Accountability is retro, and Trump being investigated for self-enrichment while being president is like a shark being questioned for swimming. It's kind of his whole brand. Democratic lawmakers are throwing around words like conflict of interest, as if that means anything anymore. Spoiler, it doesn't. The SEC, crickets. Ethics watchdogs, muzzled. The public, either too numb or too broke or too busy buying DJT on Robinhood in hopes of catching a slice of the pie. At this point, the American economy is less a market and more a game show, hosted by a man with no filter, no shame, and apparently no rules. Oh, my favorite show is on. It's Trump versus reality. The president once again is demanding that Apple make iPhones in the good old US of A, a move about as practical as building a nuclear reactor out of Lincoln logs. Despite the tariff tantrums aimed at China, Apple has no real interest in relocating iPhone production stateside. Why? Because it turns out making high-end consumer tech in America is slightly more complicated than shouting, "Bring jobs back" into a microphone. So here, let's do the math, and I hate math. An iPhone that cost $1,000 today would balloon balloon over $3,000 if made in the United States. And no, that doesn't include the emotional toll of trying to explain to a suburban teenager why she can't afford the newest model. Labor is more expensive, vocational training for precision assembly is virtually non-existent, and the supply chain Apple's built over decades in China doesn't exactly teleport. Shocking, we know. Apple has pledged $500 billion in United States investment through 2028. But don't get that twisted, none of that goes towards making iPhones here. It's mostly data centers, tax write-offs, and the occasional PR-friendly solar panel. Real production is being quietly shifted to India and Vietnam, where tariffs sting a little less, and the labor force actually knows how to build the damn things. This is what happens when politics try to cosplay as economics. Trump gets to flex his America First fantasy, Apple keeps its margins fat, and you still get your phone made with the help of a global supply chain that no flag-waving press conference can untangle. So next time you're doom scrolling on your iPhone 16 Pro Max, assembled in India, remember, patriotism doesn't pay the shareholders. In yet another dystopian move under the Trump administration, the Department of Education has decided that ensuring basic civil rights for Native American students is just a little too woke. They've officially scrapped a civil rights agreement with South Dakota's Rapid City area schools, a deal that was supposed to fix things, like disproportionate suspensions, classroom exclusion, and the minor detail of Native students being arrested at wildly higher rates than their white peers, just casual racism in the lunch line. The original agreement came after a federal investigation that confirmed what Native communities have been saying for decades. Their kids are being pushed out of classrooms and into handcuffs. But apparently, rooting out that kind of institutional rot is now considered a violation of civil rights laws, at least according to the Department of White Feelings and Selective Memory. Their reasoning? The reforms rely too heavily on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in 2025, nothing triggers this government quite like the word equity. It's the new Voldemort. Say it and you risk having your budget slashed, your office purged, and your diversity training replaced with a Ronald Reagan coloring book. District officials are totally pinky promising to continue the reforms on their own because accountability is asking a system that needed federal intervention in the first place to suddenly self-regulate. Critics are understandably skeptical because when you remove oversight and call it freedom, what you're really doing is abandoning the most vulnerable kids to a system designed to erase them. So Native students are thrown under the bus of political convenience, just another chapter in America's long tradition of breaking promises to Indigenous people, now with less paperwork. In a bold and entirely on-brand move for 2025, the Trump administration has decided that America's national parks are looking a little too clean these days. So naturally, the Environmental Protection Agency, which now seems to function more like the Extraction Promotion Agency, is proposing to kill off the Regional Haze Rule, a regulation that for over 2 decades has kept places like the Grand Canyon from looking like the inside of a coal miner's lung. The Regional Haze Rule, born out of the Clean Air Act and a basic desire to see the horizon, led to massive reductions in pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, 500,000 tons of it a year, give or take a Chernobyl. As a result, the air got clearer, the views got better, and millions of Americans got to visit their favorite parks without needing an inhaler and a headlamp. But apparently, clean air has now been deemed regulatory overreach, because why stop at deregulating train brakes and gutting flood protections when you can go for the lungs of Yosemite? Energy companies, those famously unbiased stewards of public health, claim the rule has done its job. This is like saying the fire department should be abolished because your house isn't currently on fire. And never mind that the EPA's own data shows we're still making progress. Facts are a liberal conspiracy after all. Tourism? Who needs it? Let's turn the Grand Canyon into the Grand Smog Chasm. Think of the branding opportunities. Come for the view. Stay because your flight was grounded by airborne acid fog. And for those of you worried about the loss of natural beauty, don't. The Trump administration has made it clear. If you want a pristine mountain view, you can always look at an NFT of one. So while conservationists are screaming into paper bags and lawyers are sharpening their legal knives, the rest of us are left to wonder, how long until the EPA changes its motto from protecting human health and the environment to pollution is patriotic? In a stunning act of financial masochism, the House has voted to overturn a Biden-era rule that would have capped bank overdraft fees at a humane $5. That's right, because we're here to serve the people is when you preserve a bank's God-given right to charge you $35 for accidentally buying a $3 coffee when your account dipped to $2.87. The regulation, which was supposed to take effect this October, would have saved everyday Americans around $5 billion a year. That's billion with a B, which in congressional terms is roughly the cost of one Pentagon screw ruin half of a fighter jet that spontaneously burst into flames on takeoff. Instead, Congress, under the ever-generous direction of the financial lobby, said, no, actually, the banks need that money more than you do, because while you're living paycheck to paycheck, JP Morgan is just trying to make ends meet on Jamie Dimon's yacht. Republicans, ever the defenders of the downtrodden Fortune 500, argued that capping overdraft fees would limit access to credit, because access to credit is getting hit with a $35 fee for a $12 Uber that causes your rent check to bounce, incurring another $35 fee, which triggers yet another charge until your entire paycheck is devoured by an Ouroboros of Overdrafts. Democrats called the repeal a slap in the face to low-income Americans, but Congress disagreed. It's not a slap in the face, it's just capitalism doing jazz hands with brass knuckles. The bill now heads to President Trump's desk, where it'll almost certainly be signed with one of those gold-plated Sharpies followed by a triumphant Truth Social post. So if you're a working-class American, just remember, in the eyes of your government, financial hardship isn't a systemic failure, it's a business model. In what might be the worst lease agreement since Rent the Musical, New York City has officially handed U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement the keys to a brand new office inside of Rikers Island. That's right, because when you think of your tired and huddled masses, you definitely think, let's start with a jail. This marks a full U-turn from the city's 2014 stance when ICE was kindly asked to get lost. But under Mayor Eric Adams' administration, in what critics are calling either a policy pivot or a suspiciously timed favor, ICE now has a front row seat to one of the most notorious jails in America. Coincidentally, this ICE-friendly policy popped up right after federal prosecutors mysteriously dropped their investigation into the mayor. But hey, we're sure it's just a happy accident that the Trump administration's #1 immigration demand got fulfilled faster than a 2 a.m. Postmates order. According to the city, ICE's officials will focus on gang and drug enforcement, which sounds comforting until you remember this is the same agency that's been known to detain people for having the wrong accent while buying milk. Legal advocacy groups, human rights organizations, and literally anyone with a memory longer than 12 minutes are sounding the alarm. They say this move could shatter trust in immigrant communities and undermine sanctuary protections. But Adams insists it's about public safety, a phrase that now apparently includes installing a federal deportation agency in the basement of a jail with a documented abuse problem. So if you're an immigrant New Yorker, good news, now your subway ride and your jail time both come with federal surveillance. In a bold new effort to streamline public safety right into the trash can, the National Weather Service has announced it will no longer provide weather alerts in any language other than English. So if you're one of the 68 million Americans who speak a different language at home, good luck, and may the weather be ever in your favor. This decision, brought to you by the Trump administration's continuing campaign to prove that diversity is a luxury we can't afford, comes after the quiet expiration of a contract with Lilt, an AI-based translation service. You might know Lilt as the program that helped non-English speakers not die during tornadoes. But apparently fiscal responsibility now means saving money by letting monolingual alerts do the job in a multilingual nation. The impact? Pretty straightforward. Spanish speakers, Chinese speakers, Vietnamese speakers, French speakers, Samoan speakers will now all need to learn urgent meteorological English, or just hope that tornado warning sounds threatening enough in any language. Let's be clear, this isn't a hypothetical issue. In 2021, a Spanish-speaking family in Kentucky only took shelter after receiving a translated alert that quite literally saved their lives. But hey, what's a few lives compared to the freedom of not funding inclusive weather updates? While forecasters used to manually translate alerts, that system was scrapped for being too labor-intensive. So instead of hiring more people or renewing a successful AI system, the government has gone with the more cost-effective strategy of leaving people to guess if a giant hailstorm is a friendly weather hug or imminent death. So buckle up, America. The storm is coming, but if you don't speak English, don't expect a heads up. In the latest episode of States That Still Have a Spine, officials in Maine have told the Trump administration to take its federal funding threats and shove them somewhere the sun doesn't shine, probably next to the burnt remains of Title I. The showdown began when the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services declared that Greeley High School, the Maine Principals Association, and the state's Department of Education were in violation of Title IX for doing the unthinkable, letting a transgender girl run in a track event. That's right, in 2025, a trans kid ran a race and won, and the federal government responded like it was an act of terrorism. Trump's HHS handed down a 10-day ultimatum demanding Maine bar trans girls from competing in girls' sports, threatening to yank federal funds like a schoolyard bully stealing lunch money. But instead of folding, Maine's officials and Governor Janet Mills said, try us. And they have a point. Maine's own laws protect transgender students. So while Trump's team tries to reinterpret Title IX to mean only girls we approve of can play, Maine is going with the radical idea that civil rights apply to everyone. Of course, Trump escalated by threatening to pull federal funding, presumably hoping that cutting school lunches and special ed programs would make the state reconsider. But Governor Mills fired back with a good old-fashioned, we'll see you in court, proving that even under federal pressure, Maine still believes in constitutional law and human decency. The Department of Education is laying groundwork for a potential Justice Department prosecution, because what better use of federal time and resources than suing a high school for letting a kid run track? In his latest bid to own the Libs and the planet simultaneously, President Trump has issued a bold new executive order declaring a national energy emergency. What's the cause? Not wildfires, record droughts, or Miami becoming Atlantis, but too many climate laws hurting fossil fuel companies' feelings. Under this order, the Department of Justice will now sue states for daring to pass laws that try to hold oil and gas giants accountable for decades of carbon dumping. Specifically in the crosshairs, laws in Vermont and New York that treat fossil fuel companies like they're toxic waste sites, because they are, and try to make them pay up Superfund style. Trump's reasoning? AI is thirsty for power. With all the new electricity demands from artificial intelligence, data centers, and Elon Musk's ego, we apparently need to burn more fossil fuels and fast. In Trump world, the solution isn't building better grids or expanding renewables. No, it's launching a DOJ crusade to kneecap any state that dares suggest Exxon pay for the climate mess. Environmental groups and Democratic governors are understandably somewhere between furious and exhausted. They argue this is a gross violation of states' rights, the same states' rights that Republicans love when banning books or trans people, but when a blue state wants to charge Chevron for climate collapse, suddenly it's a federal emergency. Oil lobbyists are thrilled, though, calling it a bold defense of freedom, specifically the freedom to pollute without consequence. Legal experts say the executive order will likely spark an avalanche of lawsuits, potentially turning courts into the new battlefield of the climate war. But hey, at least the DOJ is finally doing something, just not for you. That's all for Brainrot News. Like, subscribe, and if this episode overdrafts your Hope account, there's a $35 fee for that too.